Welcome back to my Low Vision Awareness Month series. This video is actually going to be the first video within a 3-part series all about school. So stay tuned for the rest of them, but this one specifically will be about just what school is like as a low vision student in general. What sort of things are different than being a regular ed student versus a low vision student. So let's get into it. Okay, so each grade or each level of school was of course different, and being that we are now of course in a pandemic, that is also very different. So I have a lot to say based on what point of school I was in. And of course also this was only my personal experience. It's different for every single low vision student based on the things that work best for them and what their vision is, and also just when you went to school as a low vision student. So we will start with elementary school. The way that my elementary school worked was it was split. So kindergarten through 2nd grade went to one school, and then 3rd grade through 5th grade went to another school. This is important because when I was at the K through 2nd grade school, I didn't really have any accommodations, and there wasn't much need for accommodations. Around probably 1st or 2nd grade is when I started to get things enlarged on large 11 by 17 paper, or I think maybe then I got a dome magnifier. That is a little bit fuzzy to me, but that was about all. And especially at that age, you don't have to do a whole lot of studying. You're not reading textbooks. You don't have to read the board as much. A lot of little kid books in general just have large font, so it wasn't too much of an issue. I do know that when I was in 1st grade is when I actually got my IEP. An IEP stands for an Individualized Educational Plan. Basically, it's a legal document that states that all of my teachers in the school has to follow certain accommodations in the classroom for me. So things that would be on the IEP were, when I was younger, it would be used our colors on the whiteboard when we had a whiteboard. It would be enlarge my worksheets on the 11 by 17 paper. It would be things like sit me in the front of the classroom. I think those were my main accommodations as a elementary student, especially for the first half of elementary school. So not too much different, but there were a few little things. And I actually didn't start school with an IEP because we were unaware, my family was unaware at the time that with glasses on, I was not corrected to 20/20. My eye doctor at the time had actually told us that I was. However, my parents and my 1st grade teacher noticed some things that were not quite right, and they noticed my nystagmus, which is my eyes moving back and forth, which automatically qualifies you for an IEP. So in 1st grade I got that, but nothing was too different except for maybe some enlarged work and sitting in the front of the classroom. Probably around 2nd grade is when I realized that I couldn't see the same as other kids, but I fit in pretty well. It didn't make too much of a difference. From 3rd through 5th grade, for the most part, it was the same, except for one big factor. In about 4th grade, near the end-ish, is when I met my first vision teacher. I think they're called a vision itinerant teacher. I don't exactly know. I just call her my vision teacher. But it is a teacher who specifically works with low vision / blind students. And of course it depends on the school district, but for mine, the vision teacher would go around from school to school and work specifically with the low vision students. So they would have a caseload of students from all different schools that they would go around from school to school and work with. Apparently, I did have a vision itinerant from 1st grade through 4th grade. However, I don't remember really ever meeting her. I did recognize her name once I was told, but she wasn't really ever a part of my schooling. I don't remember ever really meeting her. I don't know why she never really came. I just don't remember her. So in 4th grade, when my vision teacher, who I have had pretty much ever since, she came and she showed me so many different accessibility things. She showed me how to use Zoom Text on the computers, which is a software that enlarges everything on your screen. She showed me a bunch of different types of magnifiers that I could use in class. She had book stands for me to use. She brought large print books, like large print chapter books. She brought enlarged maps, so many different things. And so my head was just like, whoa, what is all of this? Because I knew I was different, but I didn't know to that extent. I didn't know that there were things out there that could make my schooling even easier. Because my teachers did their best to work with me, but of course, without that vision teacher there to help assist my teacher and give them the proper resources that they needed, there was just a lack of care there. So I got that about end of 4th grade. 5th grade, I started to utilize all of those tools. I became very comfortable with it. And 5th grade is also the first time that I really got involved with the blind and visually impaired community here in my school district. I think at about end of 5th grade, I was invited to go to a mini summer camp, day summer camp, for a week or two that had all of the different vision kids within my school district come, and we just did a bunch of life skills things together, and I just got to know all of them, and that was my first time really interacting with other blind and visually impaired kids, which that is the moment that I fell in love with advocacy and just being a part of this community. Now, middle school. Middle school is where a lot of things changed. In middle school, in 6th grade, I started using an iPad. Now, I know that many students who are younger than me, that are vision students, got to start using iPads within elementary school. However, at the point that I was at, once our school district got iPads, I was then in 6th grade. And I just want to also make this clear. I was the only student who used an iPad. I know that many schools now have switched to everyone using a Chromebook or everyone using an iPad. Up until my junior year, I was the only kid who had a device, a technology device that I did my schoolwork on. Everything was still pen and paper. You know, we had carts of Chromebooks or netbooks, if anybody remembers what netbooks are. They're essentially mini Chromebooks that are very tiny and very old. But yeah, I was the only one who was using an iPad, so that was definitely an accommodation. So I would use the iPad. At this point, for pretty much all of middle school, what I would do is I would have my teachers send things to me digitally in Google Drive folders, any of my worksheets, textbooks, homework, whatever it may be. They would put that in my Google Drive folder, or say PowerPoints that they were showing. And I would be able to look at it on my iPad, but I would still write with pencil and paper on the physical worksheet, because I could see the physical worksheet enough to see where the questions were and just fill it out, because I personally really liked writing physically on a worksheet. It was how I learned best, even though that wasn't what I could see best. Another way that I really started to utilize my iPad was through things like Zoom, which, yes, everyone knows what Zoom is now. However, I was first introduced to Zoom, I'm not quite sure when, but probably in middle school at some point, as a screen sharing software. So my teacher would put Zoom on their computer, and then whatever notes or PowerPoints or whatever they were showing from their computer onto the projector on the board during class, they would just connect their screen, their computer screen, to my iPad. We would have a password, and so I could see whatever was projected up on the board on my computer screen. There's a bunch of different programs that I used, such as Zoom, Join Me, Blizz. There were so many. but Zoom is certainly one of them that I know I used for at least a year or two. So those were the main ways that I did school in middle school. There were, every now and again, I would still have enlarged sheets of paper of worksheets instead of having it digitally. That was usually for tests, or if there was like a certain assignment that had graphs or tables on it that was really hard to make digital and for me to then fill out on a physical worksheet. But for the most part, those were my accommodations. I still use Zoom text on the computers. I still use dome magnifiers when needed. I still sat in the front of the classroom, although I will say around middle school is when I noticed that this accommodation didn't really mean anything, but I still had it. So, and in middle school, things like extra time did start to mean a little bit more because you have tests and reading assignments that are longer. And those were things that I definitely needed extra time on, being that with my eyes moving and eye strain, it just took me longer to read these assignments. So that was another accommodation that I started to really use within middle school. Middle school is also when I started to probably face the most issues with teachers and accommodations, getting access to my schoolwork. Because not everyone was digital at this time and I was the only one who was, it was very difficult for teachers to remember to send me things digitally and to send it to me in the proper way, or even just be willing to make a digital format of something if it wasn't already a digital format. It wasn't too bad in middle school, but I will say that was the first time I really started to experience that issue. I, of course, had access issues within elementary school of maybe not being able to read a certain chapter book. I know there were times like I couldn't read graphic novels, and that would get really tricky if we had like a reading group that you needed a graphic novel for. But otherwise, it was pretty much fine. Then there's high school. Another video in this series will be all about different access and accommodation issues that I faced within high school. So that is going to be a whole separate issue. I am just going to talk about my accommodations and the way that that has changed throughout high school, because high school was a whirlwind. A lot happened. My freshman year of high school was pretty similar to all of my middle school years. I looked at everything on my iPad, wrote down on physical worksheets. For the most part, it was pretty much the same. My sophomore year, however, was very different. My sophomore year started like all of those years previous. However, my eyes started to develop cataracts throughout my sophomore year, and which meant my vision was decreasing throughout the year, and that meant I needed to find a new way to do my schoolwork. I switched to doing everything completely digital. It was definitely an adjustment, but with an amazing app called Notability, which any of my other low vision peeps out there, you know how amazing this app is. But basically, I would have all of my worksheets, everything, on my iPad, and I would be able to still physically write on it with like a stylus, a pen stylus. I could still like handwrite on it, but I could zoom it way in on my iPad and then write on it and then send it as a PDF file to my teacher. And that's how I would do all of my schoolwork. Of course, if there were certain situations where a teacher really didn't want me to have it digitally, such as like a big test or exam or whatnot, they would still print it out in a physical paper format. It just wasn't feasible for many assignments because my text size had to be so big, and I had to write in Sharpie, which meant that all of the papers had to be one-sided because obviously Sharpie bleeds through. And that was the only thing that I could see very well. So that was definitely tricky. I found it difficult to even use screen sharing apps to see the board because I just couldn't keep up. So my teachers, I really had to emphasize, had to verbalize everything that they were writing on the board, just make sure to verbalize a lot of it. And I just became very good at mentally taking down notes, because writing out notes for me was always something very difficult and very taxing, because I couldn't focus on looking at the board and writing notes, or looking at my iPad screen and writing notes. So I became very good at just taking it all in and kind of putting it into a special like memory section of my brain that was notes. So that was my sophomore year. A lot happened, a lot changed. At the end of the school year, I ended up having my cataract surgeries, which of course caused some disarray within my schedule. I took finals early or didn't take some, or it was a whole mess, but that was definitely some special circumstances. And I also want to mention, I had a vision teacher throughout all of this time. And so from 4th grade on, I pretty much had the same vision teacher, with a few exceptions of like 1 year in there and like half a year. But for the most part, it was always the same lady. And throughout all of these changes, my vision teacher was always there to help my teachers in any way that they needed help of adjusting to whatever my new needs were, and just helping me figure out what would best work for me next. Because even though I stayed doing the same thing from all of middle school through the beginning of high school, I did still try out different methods of things. Instead of using a screen sharing app, I would use a monocular to try to see the board, things like that, which I found what I really liked, but I did still try new things to see what worked best for me. Now, my junior year was very different as well, because, well, during second semester, we went into lockdown for a global pandemic. But it was also different in the sense that my junior year was the first year that my high school went to completely digital for everyone. During my junior year, everyone was issued a Chromebook, which made my life quite a bit easier, actually. Teachers started to really utilize Google Classroom, and so there was a lot more access to things digitally. Of course, I still faced issues with trying to get teachers to send me stuff digitally and getting access to it, because although everyone had a Chromebook, most things were still on paper for kids. So everything wasn't just already online. However, once school was canceled in March and we switched to doing all virtual, I know that this was a very hard transition for many people, but I will say, and I know that for a fact for many of my other low vision friends who are in school, it was actually a huge relief, because all of us have now had access to our schoolwork in a way that we haven't before. It is amazing how much better we can do on our schoolwork when we don't have to fight every single day, every single hour with every single teacher to get access to our schoolwork and be reminding them, please send this to me. And then when they don't send it to you until the end of the school day, and then you have to go home and do that many hours of schoolwork, when you just have access to it right away with everyone else, and you don't really need any accommodations except for maybe some extra time, it's amazing. So now that I'm in my senior year, I have decided to completely go to an online high school. I don't currently go to the same high school as I went to for my freshman through junior year. And this was something that I considered even before there was a pandemic, just for several reasons. Number one, just getting access to schoolwork. And number two, bullying was bad. I noticed that my junior year, kids started to really pick up on my vision and really take advantage of me. And that's something that I dealt with all of school. However, it got to a point that my junior year that it started to become unsafe, and then my school wanted to take away safety measures, and that was just something that we couldn't take the chance with. We couldn't take the chance of potentially going back in person with nobody knowing where this pandemic would turn out. We couldn't take the risk of me going back in a high school where it was already a bit unsafe because of kids taking advantage of me, and they had already taken away certain safety measures. So now that I'm in online high school, and I have done that since the very beginning of this school year, it has been amazing. I, of course, have still faced issues with this high school. However, in my daily life of having to do schoolwork, it is so much easier, and I'm glad that I had the experience of going to a public high school in person for so many years, because that taught me advocacy skills that I otherwise never would have had, because the real world isn't made to just accommodate me right away. So I'm very glad that I had that experience, but it is also very refreshing to have a break from having to do all of that. So that's just a glimpse of what school is like as a low vision student. Of course, there's many other things that I didn't even touch on, but in general, that is how I personally went through school. Of course, again, this is just my experience, but I do know that like some of the things that I did have similarities to what other students with low vision also do. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for the rest of this little mini series and just all the videos this month, and have a good rest of your day.